The room froze as the billionaire owner stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting through the noise like thunder. What just happened? Where in the world are you watching from today? Paris, Tokyo, Sydney? Drop your city in the comments below. At first glance, he was just a black waiter humiliated by a wealthy guest in a luxury hotel. But no one expected the powerful woman behind the scenes to reveal that tonight's story is more than drama. It's a wake-up call about class, power, and dignity. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Stay with us to the end, because what starts as a moment of public shame becomes a stunning turn of justice that leaves millions speechless. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real stories that hit deep, and let us know if you saw the twist coming. This one you'll remember. The Platinum Crest Hotel stood like a beacon in the heart of Vancouver's vibrant downtown, its glass and steel structure reflecting the snow-capped mountains in the distance. Inside, the grand dining hall glowed with understated elegance. Amber light cascaded from modern fixtures that floated like luminous clouds above the dark hardwood floor, casting warm reflections on the crystal stemware below. The air carried notes of truffle oil, aged whiskey, and quiet privilege. It was the kind of place where conversations were conducted in hushed tones, where time seemed to slow, and every detail whispered of exclusivity. Among the tables moved a figure who didn't seem to belong to this world of designer suits and de-investment portfolios, yet belonged more than any of them would ever know. Thomas Reed navigated between the tables with precision and grace. At 26, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that belied his years. His fair skin flushed slightly from the heat of the kitchen, blue eyes alert and observant. He wore the hotel's black and white server uniform impeccably, though fatigue lined his face after covering a double shift. His shoes pinched with every step, but his smile never faltered. The Platinum Crest demanded perfection, and Thomas delivered it, plate after plate, smile after smile. To most guests, he was nearly invisible, a necessary fixture like the tables and chairs. What no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that Thomas didn't need this job. He didn't need the modest paycheck or the aching feet. He was the son of Eleanor Reed, a billionaire tech mogul whose empire stretched across continents. He had never mentioned it, never slipped up, not once. To the staff, he was simply Thomas, the one who volunteered for holiday shifts, who remembered every regular's preferences, who treated the dishwashers with the same respect as the executive chef. He had insisted on using his father's last name, had begged his mother not to interfere, and though Eleanor had winced at the thought of her son carrying heavy trays and bowing to people who would never know his worth, she had respected his wish with one condition: she would always be nearby, just in case. Thomas didn't do this to prove a point to anyone else. It wasn't rebellion, it was education. He wanted to understand the world without filters. He wanted to feel how people treated someone they didn't think mattered. He wanted to earn something. His hands, though well kept, were used to work. His heart, though privileged, was grounded in purpose. Across the room, a jazz trio played softly, barely audible beneath the gentle hum of conversation and occasional laughter. Thomas approached table 9, where an elderly couple nodded appreciatively at the dessert he had just delivered. "Exquisite," the man said, adjusting his glasses. "Please give our compliments to the chef." Thomas bowed slightly and promised he would. Moments like these made the night bearable, small kindnesses amid the sea of indifference. Back at the service station, he refilled water pitchers with practiced efficiency. His colleague Nadia passed behind him with a wink. "2 more hours," she whispered. "3 for me," he replied with a smile. The camaraderie helped. It reminded him he wasn't alone, even with the invisible barrier that separated those who served from those being served. The clock ticked toward 9 p.m. The pace quickened as late reservations arrived. Thomas checked the seating chart, noting a VIP table in the west corner. He straightened his tie, wiped a smudge from his sleeve, and prepared himself. To him, every table was an opportunity to perfect his craft, to find meaning in the details. Then the energy in the room shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The host at the entrance stood straighter. Staff exchanged glances. Thomas turned and saw him, a tall man in a tailored black suit that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His dark hair was styled with precision, gold watch glinting at his wrist. Alexander Frost, a name Thomas recognized from social media and whispered gossip, influencer, entrepreneur, notorious for his cutting remarks and extravagant lifestyle. He didn't enter rooms, he claimed them. Alexander barely acknowledged the host as he was guided to the prime table in the west corner. He sat, adjusted his cuffs with deliberate slowness, and pulled out his phone before the chair had fully settled. Thomas inhaled quietly, centered himself, and approached the table. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Platinum Crest. May I start you with something to drink?" His tone was warm, professional. He stood tall despite the fatigue pulling at his shoulders. Alexander didn't look up. "Bourbon neat. Make it Pappy Van Winkle 23, and be quick about it." "I have calls to make." The words weren't sharp, they were flat, as if Thomas were merely a voice, activated service rather than a person. He flicked his hand dismissively, gaze fixed on his phone. Thomas paused for the briefest moment, then he nodded. "Right away, sir," and turned to retrieve the drink. Something about the moment, the coldness in Alexander's tone, the way he didn't bother to make eye contact settled in Thomas's chest like a small stone. It was the same reminder that echoed through rooms like this every night. Some people only see the uniform, not the person wearing it. As Thomas returned with the bourbon, Alexander was now speaking loudly on his phone, gesturing with his free hand. "No, tell them the deal closes tomorrow or we walk." "I don't have time for amateurs." He barely acknowledged Thomas as the drink was placed before him. Thomas stepped back, waiting to see if anything else was needed. Alexander reached for the glass without looking, his hand knocking against it. In an instant, the amber liquid toppled, splashing across the white tablecloth and onto Thomas's uniform. The bourbon soaked through immediately, the expensive liquor wasted on fabric. A collective intake of breath rippled through nearby tables. The jazz trio missed a beat. Alexander finally looked up, his dark eyes narrowing not with concern but with irritation. "For God's sake," he snapped, his voice slicing through the ambient noise. "Can't you do anything right?" The words landed like a physical blow. Heads turned. A woman at the next table paused mid-conversation. A man across the room lowered his menu, brow furrowed. Thomas stood perfectly still, his shirt damp, the scent of bourbon rising from his clothes. But more than the physical discomfort was the weight of every eye now on him, the heat of humiliation climbing up his neck. Still, he kept his voice level. "I apologize, sir. Let me get you another." Alexander raised his hand as if to silence him. "Do they just hire anyone here?" he said with a sneer. "I come to this hotel for excellence, not incompetence." His voice carried, deliberately projected for maximum impact. Thomas knelt slightly, dabbing at the spill with a napkin. "I'll clean this up right away," he said, eyes down not from shame, but from a refusal to engage with cruelty. Alexander laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. "Oh, how generous of you. Listen, kid, places like this are clearly above your pay grade. Stick to diners or fast food, somewhere more your level." The insult hung in the air, razor sharp and deliberate. Thomas didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply rose slowly, standing in his damp uniform with quiet dignity. His eyes met Alexander's, calm and clear. "Yes, sir, "I'll have that drink replaced right away," he repeated and turned to walk back toward the bar. But Alexander wasn't finished. He reached for the glass of water that sat untouched on his table. With a calculated flick of his wrist, he hurled it toward Thomas's retreating back. The glass clinked sharply as it hit the floor, water exploding across Thomas's pants and shoes. A collective gasp rose from the room. Someone audibly muttered, "What the hell?" The water ran in rivulets down Thomas's legs, soaking into his socks, pooling beneath his shoes. Alexander burst into laughter, a high, triumphant sound. "Maybe that will teach you to pay attention," he called out, still seated, still smirking. Thomas stopped in place. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear or even shock, but from the sheer restraint it took to remain composed. For a brief moment, he stared straight ahead, the hum of the dining room swirling around him like static. Then he inhaled deeply and continued walking, head held high. He did not rush. He did not crumble. He carried his soaked uniform like armor. At the service station, Nadia stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "What just happened?" she whispered. But Thomas said nothing. He just hung the soiled towel on the counter and reached for a fresh cloth. Out in the dining hall, Alexander returned to his phone call, lips curved in satisfaction. "Honestly," he said loud enough for half the room to hear, "some people just don't know their place." But something had shifted. The conversations that once flowed easily now felt strained. Diners exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman near the window whispered to her husband, "That poor young man handled it better than I would have," and in the far corner, behind a frosted glass partition, a tall woman in a charcoal suit set down her tablet. Her silver-streaked hair framed a face now tight with controlled anger as her eyes followed Thomas's retreat. Because for the first time all evening, Eleanor Reed wasn't focused on quarterly reports or expansion plans. She was watching something unfold, something deeply personal, something infuriating. And as she reached into her jacket and signaled for the manager, the air shifted once more. The storm had begun. The water still dripped from Thomas's uniform as he stood by the service station, his pants clinging uncomfortably to his legs. His fingers were curled into fists, knuckles white, but his expression remained neutral. The sting wasn't from the cold water or the lingering scent of bourbon. It was from the laughter, that high, victorious sound Alexander had let out after throwing the drink. It was a statement. "I can do this to you, and you can do nothing in return." But Thomas wasn't nothing, and he knew it. What burned inside him wasn't shame, it was restraint, the kind of restraint it takes to stand tall while someone tries to strip away your dignity in public. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He simply grabbed a fresh towel, pressed it against the worst of the dampness, and told Nadia, "Cover table 9. I'll be back in a few." Out in the dining hall, the atmosphere had fractured. Patrons murmured behind menus. Some glanced toward Alexander, who now reclined in his chair with the relaxed satisfaction of someone who believed they had just won a battle. He whispered something into his phone, then chuckled, oblivious to the energy brewing around him. A woman in a red dress whispered harshly to her companion. He should be asked to leave. Her partner nodded solemnly, eyes still fixed on Alexander as though trying to understand what kind of person would find joy in such cruelty. Eleanor Reed had not moved from her booth, but her jaw was tight, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. She had watched every moment, the spilled bourbon, the insults, the water thrown like a weapon. And still, she hadn't intervened. Not yet. Thomas had asked for space, for autonomy, for the right to walk his path without the shield of her name. But watching her son be humiliated before a room full of strangers was a line she hadn't been prepared to see crossed. Quiet power radiated from her posture as she pressed a button on her phone and murmured a single command. Minutes later, Hiroshi, the hotel's manager, appeared at Alexander's table. His tailored suit was impeccable, but his eyes held steel. "Mr. Frost," he said with a tight smile, "Ms. Reed would like to have a word with you." Alexander looked up, mildly annoyed at the interruption. "Who?" he asked, not bothering to mask his irritation. "Eleanor Reed," Hiroshi said, "the owner of Platinum Crest." A beat of silence passed. Then Alexander's brows lifted in interest. Ah, finally, someone who recognizes quality when they see it. He stood with deliberate grace, adjusted his tie, and followed Hiroshi, expecting praise or, at worst, an apology for having had to endure such subpar service. Her heels clicked over the hardwood floor, rhythmic and proud. He didn't see Thomas, who had slipped into the staff bathroom, rinsing the bourbon from his hands with shaking fingers. As Alexander was led into the private lounge, Eleanor stood. She was tall, commanding in her charcoal suit with silver threads in her dark hair and an expression carved from granite. Alexander's confident stride faltered. Something in her eyes, calm but razor-sharp, made him straighten. "Mr. Frost," Eleanor began, her tone soft but unyielding, "I watched what happened out there." Alexander's lips parted, but the air had thickened around them, and the words caught in his throat. "You came into my hotel, insulted my staff, assaulted one of them in front of witnesses, and then laughed about it." Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need to yell. Her authority was in the stillness, in the weight of her gaze. "And that staff member is not just an employee. He's my son." The sentence dropped like a stone into still water. Alexander's mouth opened, then shut. His eyes darted toward the door, toward Hiroshi, toward anywhere but Eleanor's steady gaze. "Tu didn't know," he stammered. "He spilled my drink." "I saw it," Eleanor said simply. "You knocked it over. Then you blamed him. Then you threw water at him. That's not a mistake, Mr. Frost. That's character." Alexander's face flushed deep red, not from shame. He wasn't used to shame, but from exposure. His game had played out in front of the wrong audience. "Your bill is covered," Eleanor continued. "Consider it a parting gift, but you are no longer welcome here." He stared at her as though waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, he spun on his heel and walked out fast, flustered, his poise shattered. As the doors closed behind him, soft applause broke out in the hall. Not loud, not showy, but steady and sincere, not for drama, but for justice. And in the staff area, Thomas let out a single breath, long and slow, not of relief, not yet, but of readiness. Because the next part wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming something even more powerful, his voice. By sunrise, the Platinum Crest's elegant halls had returned to their polished calm, but online, the storm was just beginning. A video taken by a diner had captured the entire humiliation of Thomas Reed in under 60 seconds. The sound of Alexander Frost's voice, sharp and entitled, cut through the footage. "Maybe that'll teach you to pay attention," followed by the unmistakable splash of water. The video had gone viral within hours, reaching millions of views across platforms. When Thomas arrived for his shift that morning, his colleagues greeted him differently, not with awkwardness, but with respect. Nadia offered him coffee. "You sure about being here today?" she asked quietly. Thomas nodded, tying his apron with practiced ease. "Why wouldn't I be? The uniform didn't change overnight, neither did I." Yet the hotel was not the same. Guests now greeted him with newfound warmth. A family from Toronto stopped him just to shake his hand. "We saw what happened," the father said. "You showed our kids what real dignity looks like." Thomas didn't linger in praise. He had tables to serve, orders to take. and while the world outside might now see him as the billionaire's son, he refused to let that change him. In the executive office, Eleanor scrolled through headlines with a sigh. Humiliated server revealed as hotel owner's son. Class clash goes viral. How one man's dignity sparked a reckoning. She hadn't planned to speak to the press, but a statement had been released. At Platinum Crest, we believe that dignity is not a luxury, it's a right. We stand by our staff always. What struck her most was what she saw when she checked the hotel cameras. Thomas still working, still listening, still serving with that same thoughtful poise. He had faced public humiliation, been defended by a mother he never asked to step in, and become the center of a media storm overnight. And yet here he was, unchanged. By afternoon, the backlash against Alexander had intensified. His social media accounts were flooded with criticism. Brand partnerships were quietly